Thanks, Stephen. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And yeah, I just want to echo what Rene said, which is it's great to see so many of you here. And probably congratulate Rene, because there is a rumor that he was still in the bar at about 2 a.m., so he did very well. So my panelists, who are, as you can see, pretty eager guys, are just going to come up without me bothering to ask them. But welcome, gentlemen. I'm sure you know all these characters. No doubt they're going to try and convince you of a lot of things that most of you are going to be skeptical of, but let's see. From the left over there, Mr. Fitzgibbon, Hilton.
Good morning.
Dimitris, Wyndham.
Kalimera.
Jerome, Marriott, and
morning, everyone.
Hi.
My old friend, excuse me, can you wait for me to cue the hi? It's Elie, Radisson. So you can see they're all pretty eager to go.
Hi.
Hi, there we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So as Stephen just said, franchising, is it the future? Well, why don't we start with Mr. Fitzgibbon. Patrick, is franchising the future in the GCC?
I think it's definitely part of the future. It's not the only future. I think it's part of it. I think if you look at the growth of franchising in the hotel business globally over the last 30 years, it's kind of moved from west through to east. Europe, which probably AHIC were the only dominant franchisee probably 20 years ago, most of the hotel companies now have a very strong franchise business. We certainly have. I think selectively it'll move into markets like the Middle East. And I think it'll happen with a certain type of owner. I think it will be predominantly new owners. I don't necessarily see a change in existing companies moving to franchising. I think it'll be a new type of owner coming into the market, and particularly in what we would call the focused service market, which is, you know, offering choice to consumers who may not want to pay quite as much. And I think that's been the case globally. And so, yeah, I think it will be part of the future.
And you've just done you've just signed your first agreements in the GCC, haven't you, in Dubai?
We did a year ago. 3 hotels in Dubai came across. We actually do have other conversations underway at the moment, and I suspect if the team deliver what they've said they're going to be delivering, we'll have more over the next couple of months. And I think it's important because it's about giving choice to investors. And I think years ago, I think a lot of advisors said, oh, it's an opportunity for people to make more money. It's not, it's a different opportunity. It depends on your structure. Because franchising is not free. You can't just say, let's boot out the management company and we'll do it all ourselves. You need to have the right infrastructure in place to be able to do that. And I think there are lots and lots of our owners, particularly in Europe, are owner-operators. So they own the hotel and run it themselves. There's also the third-party management opportunity, which we'll talk about. But I think that owner-operator model has suited the European model for European market for growth. And I think we'll see some of that come into this market.
Dimitris, if you look at your portfolio, obviously, I mean, in some ways, in contrast to your friends on the panel, your model is actually dominated by franchising, particularly Ramada. What's so appealing from your perspective, and why is that such a key driver of your growth?
Look, for us, I mean, we are the world's biggest franchisor of hotels. We are predominantly a North American company, and that's how we grow. We grew with acquisitions. We've got 20 brands. Look, franchising is in our DNA, but again, I would agree with Patrick. One size doesn't fit all. I mean, we listen to our owners. In my region, Europe, Middle East, Eurasia, and Africa, we adapt to what the owner is looking for. We learn how to manage. Yes, franchising is still a key component, and it is what we feel extremely strong about, but we're going to do what the owner wants. And we learn how to do it. We actually bought a company in the US recently with the 900 properties, and 350 of those were managed. So we're getting into better understanding what the management is all about. And you know what? You learn by experience, you learn by what the market needs, and you tie up with the right owners who you have the comfort that they can do it in the best possible way. So yes, franchise is the future in certain areas, but again, one size doesn't fit all. If people want us to do manage, we will.
Elie, what's your view? There's a sort of fairly positive sort of commentary coming here. Do you feel this is where the market's ultimately moving?
I think franchising will be part of the future, as Patrick said, but it will continue to be an alternative, not a mainstream. See, there are 4 or 5 components.
Not mainstream.
Exactly, alternative, not a mainstream. But it will grow, but it will continue to be an alternative model rather than a mainstream, given the nature of the region. If you look at it, there are 5 key ingredients for a successful franchising model. First is the ability of the owner to run his hotel in a way that delivers the brand promise in a way that is cheaper to what the operator can deliver. And if you look around the seats here, you probably can count around 200 years in experience in running hotels in this part of the world. So it's probably easier said than done for somebody to come and say, I can run this hotel cheaper than you, given the background, the experience, the millions that we spend every year on our operating platforms. The second point is the product. The more bespoke and personalized the product is, the less franchisable it gets. And if you look at the region here, everything is 5-star, it's excess service rather than full service. So therefore, there's a little bit of a, I wouldn't say mismatch, but the product in this part of the world doesn't blend with the nature of the franchising model. Having said that, there is a drift now or a shift towards mid-scale, which is more franchisable and more easier to explain to owners how to run. The third point is location, and here is where you can probably play around with this part of the world. The more gateway cities you go, the more it makes sense for the operator to manage. Why? Because they already have the operating platforms to do that, and the more you go to secondary markets, where the operator will probably spend more money on running the hotel, the better it would be to give it to the owner to run it as an owner-operator. The fourth point is the ability of the owner to create scale when they manage their hotels. Why? Because with scale, they can create efficiencies. So if an owner can have 2, 3, 4 hotels, it would make probably more sense to do that. And yes, there are many owners in this part of the world who can deliver on that. Last but not least, it's not just about the owner, it's also about the operator. And we have to look, for this to work out, you have to look at the profile and the complexity of the operator. And this is not just about this part of the world, probably. This is more international or global. The more the operator is focused on branding, creating new concepts, integrating businesses together, diagonal growth, the more they are obsessed with, or extremely, excessively obsessed, and we all are, with growth, the less they are focused on managing hotels, and the more they probably prefer to franchise, and the more the operator is focused in itself on running hotels in a simplified way, just focus on the core business, the more they are probably relevant to manage the hotel. So this probably full picture is, or if you look at it holistically, would probably lend me to conclude that it will remain an alternative rather than a mainstream.
Let me pick up on that with you, Jerome, if I can. I mean, from an operator's perspective, what are the risks that you see associated with franchising? I mean, your current portfolio, you've got, what, 1,500 rooms out of 30,000 that are franchised? So it's a relatively small piece, but there does seem to be a sense that this is going to change, maybe not as fast as everyone expects, but it seems to be shifting. Are there risks from your perspective?
Yeah, if you look at our portfolio globally, about 58% of those rooms are franchised, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty significant. This being said, that's towards the US, somewhat Europe now with the growth of our mid-scale brands there. When you look at the diversity of brands that we have, you will see that it's about the same percentage of upper mid-scale and mid-scale brand or upscale brands in our portfolio. In this region, we haven't really grown the upper mid-scale, the Fairfield, the Moxie yet. And really, it's the best model to start franchising. If you look at the way we do it in the US, and we've started doing it in Europe, we are just starting now contemplating that with one owner here in Dubai. We typically take those new owners, the owner-operator, as Patrick was mentioning, and we send them to the Marriott Management School. And it's not just to teach them how to run a hotel, because most of these people will know how to run a hotel, right? They'll have to be educated how to run a Marriott hotel. And it's great. They will deliver us a hotel on standard, and we're usually pretty confident. We've got a global design team that takes care of that to make sure the delivery is good. But then we tend to forget that it's not just a general manager running a hotel. You need to have the director of sales and marketing that will be able to actually go through your systems. We've got very strong global sales agents across the world, negotiating with Microsoft, with Dell, with IBM, trying to bring in these rooms. But if you don't know how to pull them from the system and drive them towards your hotel, well, you're failing already in making the most of your hotel. The other thing is, it's just making sure that as we select the owners, we know that they're doing it for the right reasons. It's because they want to be in control of their hotel, their passion for the business, or through a third-party management company, and we'll touch on that later, I'm sure. If it's just to cut costs, and because there is a feeling that in this, especially through these challenging times now in the GCC, there's a feeling that they can cut costs better than we would, then those are probably all the wrong reasons to go through franchising. Because once you start managing those properties, you realize it's not as simple as removing employees or cutting benefits. These people will go, the intent to recommend will drop very significantly, and once your ratings start to go down on TripAdvisor, and once the loyalty members of all of our large programs start to affect negatively your hotel, review negatively your hotel, it takes years to recover from that.
Patrick, just picking up on that theme, do you think there's a perception amongst some owners perhaps that this is a way that they can make more money, that they're basically going to take some of what you would normally be taking off the table and more goes to them?
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen some of that. I think that, I mean, two things. I think, first of all, the most important recipient of franchising we haven't talked about is the customer. And actually, in most cases, the customer doesn't need to know whether a hotel is owned, operated, leased, or franchised, because you want a consistent product delivery. Whether it's franchising hotels, coffee shops, restaurants, it's all the model's a business model that sits behind the product, but ultimately the customer should get the same experience, and that's what we're trying to chase. I think that historically, if I'm honest, hotel companies probably 20 years ago may not have been as focused as they are today, and that's because the market's more competitive than it's ever been. So it's actually, if we're honest with ourselves, it's harder to run hotels in Dubai than it was 20 years ago because you face a lot more competition. The world's changed. I mean, it's just more competitive. So you've got to be a lot smarter. Now, that smart is sometimes on property, but a lot of it's off property as well. So the distribution channels you use, how you fill the hotels, and I think one of the things that's helped the franchising business model grow is the way we source our customers. Because actually it means then that you can be more focused on property at delivering the right experience to guests on a consistent basis, finding the right team members, hiring them, but also keeping them, retaining them, motivating them. And the customer delivery, much more of that centralized, but still a lot has to happen on property. So I think there has occasionally some asset managers in some parts of the world have decided actually to move not just asset management, but actually move into managing hotels themselves. And so they've said to the owner, why don't we come and manage the hotel for you instead? Now, in some cases, that's worked really well. They've built a successful management platform, but some haven't. And if you don't have a successful platform behind it, the points made earlier by my colleagues, is the owners lose out because there isn't enough depth behind the operating model to support the hotel. When a general manager leaves, you've got to replace him. Now, if you haven't got a pool of talent ready to replace him, that can cause a dip in performance for a while. It may take a time to come back. So I think but I see less of that now. I think owners are sophisticated enough to realize what they have and what they want to do. The owners that are most successful at franchising are the ones that understand the principle of franchising and buy into it, and they endorse it. They grab every aspect of it and use it. The franchisees that fight the system, with asset managers that fight the system and push back all the time, will never get the most out of it. Just never. It doesn't matter what sector you're in. Because franchising ultimately is a proven business concept, and you buy into all the pieces, pull the levers, press the buttons, and use the bits that you want to drive the performance through the business. So I think there has been some of that, but I see less of that now, Nick, than perhaps we saw 5 or 6 years ago.
Dimitris, I mean, out of the 43 hotels you've got in the region, 12 are managed and the balance are franchised. And as you said, you're obviously a franchise organization, essentially. That's your core DNA. Amongst those, they're all Ramadas, right? How many owners actually do you have across? Is it relatively few? Is it 24 out of 24?
No, we've got a portfolio of owners, which actually very well because it builds the trust. The moment you create one, then you bring another and another. I think for us, as a philosophy, there are two things when we look at this business model. As you said, it's all about somebody else's money when you look at franchise. So we have a duty of care to make sure that we do the right thing when we actually deal with somebody else's money. And what I say to my team every single day, there shouldn't be a distinction between managed and franchise. We should actually wake up every day and say, we're going to do the right thing, irrespective if we manage or if it's franchise. I think a war of talent, as Patrick said, is going to be very interesting to see as markets shrink or as markets grow and people move around. So that's going to be a very interesting in terms of how you attract talent, and the brands and all the big companies play a very big role. But again, the philosophy of you have a duty of care to do the right thing. You don't distinguish between managed and franchise because at the end of the day, it's somebody else's money. That is the key thing for me.
Yeah, and to Patrick's point, it's, you know, the critical piece of the puzzle is, does the consumer actually notice any difference, right? Because from your perspective, from a brand perspective, you want it to be seamless. You want the consumer to notice no difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Elie, I mean, looking at your portfolio, Collection, Blue, and Park Inn, really, right, in the GCC, the majority being Radisson Blue.
Correct.
Are any of those franchised at the moment?
3% today of our portfolio is franchise.
And I mean, would you sort of see that the Park Inn lends itself more to franchising than, say, the more full-service Radisson Blue, or
Probably.
or do you not have the right brand in the region to franchise yet?
I
mean,
think Park Inn,
would you franchise Red when it comes?
we wouldn't franchise Red. It's very bespoke in itself. We would probably franchise Park Inn, and we would selectively probably franchise Radisson Blue, very, very selectively.
Yeah.
You really need somebody who understands how to run a full-service hotel and run it in a way that is efficient for us to give that core brand to them to manage.
But what Jerome's saying is that you can take these owners and basically take them off to school and get them up to speed, essentially. I mean, would you?
Can you really?
I don't know.
And are there many owners who are willing to do that in this part of the world? There are some, but how many are there? If you look at the profile of the owners here, it's different somehow to the profile of your owners in Europe. It's a lot of high net worth individuals. Are they really going to go to school? Maybe they are, but I don't know many.
That's a good point, actually. And that's why it's so much easier to do that in the US and in Europe, because you're going to get young managers who are actually eager, and you know, we have a lot of immigrants coming into the US with, I mean, fairly wealthy, with funds, who want to develop their own business model, or sons of, and then, or daughters of, and they're actually going, and they're very eager to make it work. And on a Fairfield, it's easier than it is on a Marriott, much like on the Park Inn. It would probably be easier to run the business model than on a Radisson, I would imagine, because that's pretty complex, right?
Yeah.
So let's touch, if we can, about something which I think is emerging now and becoming more evident, which is third-party management companies. I mean, we heard earlier from the previous panel that, you know, asset managers 5 years ago, there'd be a table of 3 of them sitting in a corner, and that was asset management. And today we've got a panel, and you know, it's becoming mainstream. This feels a little like, you know, this is something that's happening. If you look at the rest of the world, it already has happened. It feels like it's coming. So third-party management companies, folks like Aleph and the like, who are setting up in business essentially to provide owners with the capability that we're saying potentially is absent. Some of them have already got your rubber stamp of approval in terms of their capability of doing this. Where do you, maybe start with you, Jerome, where do you see that fitting into this puzzle?
So that's a very interesting one. If you look, I mean, and we've been talking about owner-operators in US, in Europe, and starting here. Most of the franchises that we do over there are actually through third-party management company, right? And selectively on owner-operators if they go through this schooling system. Here, the issue is, and I would just reflect to a panel that happened yesterday around the fact that the operators don't share the risks, and the operator fees are probably on the high end. I think it's important to know that the management fees we have in the GCC are certainly for us the lowest in the world percentage-wise, right? Versus on revenue or GOP. Those are very, very compressed fees. It's not quite the case in Africa yet. And so we've seen the third-party management company, you mentioned Aleph, with whom we've worked in Africa. We recently signed in Liberia. There is very much room for a franchise fee and a third-party management fee. When you have very much compressed management fees on base and incentive, once you flip that to franchise and your 5% franchise fees, how much room is there for them to take, right? And that's why they're probably struggling right now to take market share in the GCC, because really the role is not there. The other thing is many of the owners actually look at franchise as their opportunity to control. And so if we come in and we say, we'll franchise, but you've got to go with the third-party management company because they know what to do, doesn't really solve, I mean, it doesn't really reach what they're trying to achieve, right? So, and that's why I think in the GCC there will always be somewhat a struggle for the third-party management company, or at least for the month and years to come. Right? It's going to take time for that model to establish itself here, whereas in Africa, we've got it already running pretty quickly.
Would you agree, Dimitris?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an enormous experience working, being a franchise powerhouse, working with three, third white label management companies. I don't think there is any exclusivity in any model. Everybody has a right to build a model and be good at it. I mean, it's all about the right partner. It's all about the right investment. We understand the fee structure. We understand the pressure because that's what we've been doing all our lives. You've got to choose the right partner. If you have the right partner, and we've seen it in the way certain brands are growing. We've seen the growth of white label operators in certain countries. We've learned how to work with them. We're very comfortable with the model. We've adjusted our fees to make sure that everybody has a stake in the game and everybody makes money. And at the end of the day, as I said, no one has an exclusivity in any type of model. If you're good at it, you might as well be very successful at it.
Patrick, what's your perception in terms of both, when you look at your pipeline, for instance, is there a shift in the pipeline in terms of how much is franchised and how much of that is going through third-party management companies as opposed to sort of owner direct, as it were?
I think in this region, the dominance is still management, and I think, I agree with Elie. It will remain so. I think certainly for the next 10 years. I think the hotel management companies, they got beaten up a little bit over a few years by asset managers, and in some cases, rightly so. We were forced to be, more proactive, move faster, develop and evolve some of what we do on property. But I think, notwithstanding that, we're 100 years old this year. Lots of us have been around as companies for a long time. We've learned. You have to keep learning and keep evolving and keep developing. We have a huge pool of talent and a lot of experience with a very broad owner base. I think there are certainly third-party management companies that will look at the market and think, wow, I can go in there and I can overnight do a better job. That's not been proven. And in Europe in particular, the third-party management companies had a huge growth and then they've plateaued because it's not as easy as everybody thinks it is. Really? It just isn't. And I think that owners have started to realize actually that's not the panacea. In some markets, they can be very successful. My sense in this region is the only third-party companies that will be successful are those that are already in this region and understand the region. They've got people who've worked here for decades and understand how to get the most out of it. I think third-party management companies that might come out of other parts of the world think they can fly a couple of people in who've been here for 6 months and open a company. I think they'll find it pretty difficult. And whereas I think there are some fledgling companies here and one or two existing companies looking to branch into it, I think we'll probably do a great job. But I think fundamentally owners have a decision to make. Do they want to work with brands? And I think then the brands will manage the hotels, or do they want to run it themselves? So I think if we see anything in the region, it's more likely to be ownership groups or family groups who decide they want to grow more and more hotels, decide they actually want to bring some of that in-house and run the business. So I think that's what we will see, if anything. And I think that's more likely to take place in the focus service arena. I think, whilst there's questions about supply and demand in Dubai particularly, I think there's more likely to be focus service hotels coming into Dubai because I still think there's a gap there. And that may well be small entrepreneurial groups, maybe family groups deciding to do it for themselves under franchise, or they'll stick with the model that they've done, the last 30 or 40 years and manage. So I think third-party management companies won't come quickly.
Elie, if you find yourself sitting in front of an owner and effectively having to pitch your abilities against a third-party management company who is potentially looking to their starting position maybe just to simply undercut you, sure. Do you feel you can still convince owners that you guys have what it takes, that you're still true operators?
First of all, if you look at it from an economic perspective, it's much more difficult to split a cake in 3 than it is to split it in 2. This is the starting point, I think. Then if you look at this part of the world, and I want to paint a caricature somehow, the owner is somehow signing with a third-party management company by signing with us because he has Rudy on the ground, because he has Alex on the ground, because he has Tim on the ground, and all of these operating platforms that we have on the ground are nothing but outsourced, categorically, management companies that us as operators have placed in those regions to focus on those regions. So that third-party management company will have a tough job to convince the owner in terms of what is it that they're going to do to be more relevant than us to their hotels, other than undercutting our fees.
Well, and some operators may actually find that quite attractive, right? If they say, will they potentially roll the dice, particularly in the select service and sort of economy segments where it looks to some people that it's fairly simple to run it. You just need the booking engine.
I would like to think otherwise somehow. I mean, if you look at this part of the world, one basic example, and I think it was mentioned earlier, talent acquisition, talent retention. And this is becoming increasingly complex and critical part of running hotels in this part of the world. Can a startup management third-party operator have access to the same talent pool as Rudy, as Alex, as our teams? I doubt that.
No, and to be fair, to the point you were making, Nick, we need to realize as operators that there are locations or type of hotels in those locations that we just can't manage as effectively as the owner or the third-party management could, right? And so I took the example of Liberia earlier. There was, I mean, certainly a very strong need to put 4 points there that that location needed the select service high-quality hotel. But we also realized that there was no way for Marriott to actually give it as much attention as it deserves on the operation side. And so that's when partnering with the third-party management company, if the owner can do it himself, is very precious, right?
Yeah.
They know our standards, they know what we're doing, how we're doing it. That's where they become very useful to us.
I fully agree. It depends. I mean, this goes back not just to can the operator manage it. It depends on the choice and the focus of the operator. Is the operator really focused on managing hotels in secondary locations or not? And it's a choice that you have to make.
Yeah.
The other thing about, I mean, I guess the big question about franchising, or what franchising provides, is an opportunity to grow at scale quickly. Yeah, and that's why, that's why we do it. But you only want to do it if it works properly. It has to be new markets, it has to be new products, and it has to be reflective of what we're offering to consumers. It's just about getting scale in a way that's sustainable and gives more choice to your customers in the markets they want to be in. Yeah. And that's why it's grown so successfully. But you've got to be very selective about who you do it with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you look what we do, I mean, we've got a motto in Wyndham. We've got everything that a traveler needs at any price point. Again, when you've got 20 brands and we are very strong in that mid segment, it's exactly the point you raised. You need to have the right brands to give the owner, the white label, the guest, whatever he needs at the point that he needs it. I think that's key. That's the game of survival.
Yeah. So this is partly about making sure you're satisfying owners, doing the right thing as management companies, and offering them the option of if they want it, I guess, right, in terms of flexibility. Exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we unfortunately have run out of time, but I'd just like to thank the panelists. I'd like you to thank the panelists, and thank you for being here with us this morning. It's much appreciated. Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.